All right, Ilya. It's been an interesting couple of weeks since we last talked to you. It seems like the issue of the day right now is the state of the health of the Russian government and the Russian military. And
mental health, you mean?
Well, actually, all of those things. It seems like they're losing steam, and it also, from my perspective, seems like Ukraine has just been waiting for this, and so that they can take advantage of this opportunity. And does that feel right to you?
Yeah, I think so as well. I think that basically the anticipation is that they're going just to die by themselves, because they cannot do much. I think that the best joke on this was that Russian army was ready to capture Berlin and Paris in 3 days, but for some reason they decided to go through Bakhmut and got stuck.
Yes. And we've seen how well that's working out for them.
Yes. And Bakhmut is a small town, very, very unfortunate, and they are struggling there already, like 9 months, 10 months, something like this. So it's outstanding, and they cannot capture a very, very small town where before the beginning of the war was something like 25,000 people, 30,000 people. That's the scale of the place, and
yes.
They are fighting, street by street, block by block, but cannot advance.
Yeah. So talk to us about the mental health of the people and the mental health of Putin himself inside of Russia.
Well, I don't know much about Putin in this regards. My mental health questions about him started when he decided to invade a year ago, because it was a suicidal move from the very beginning. But I think that right now, many representatives of Russian elite, they start to pretend that they're literally crazy. Probably that's because of the future criminal prosecution. So they want to pretend that they shouldn't be put into prison or whatever, because they're mentally ill. Because when
they are mentally ill.
That they are mentally ill, yes. Before that, it was a technology that was utilized by our former president, Mr. Medvedev, who was doing all the different types of crazy statements, totally ridiculous, that everybody was just like writing off and discarding because they're like out of this planet. But what was it, 2 days ago, the chief of National Security Council and the former chief of FSB, Nikolai Patrushev, published an article in the leading government Russian newspaper, where he was saying that the United States is about to collapse and to split away, and the southern states are about to go to Mexico, and that 2 times already in the history Russia saved United States from the collapse, and now it's the 3rd time, but they are not going to intervene this time, let United States collapse. And all this kind of statements like this, after reading this, okay, if this is the guy who is kind of chief of national security, who is the main mastermind of all analytics that has been presented to Mr. Putin, then it's no surprise what is the decision-making process, what's happening in Kremlin right now.
So when he makes a statement like that, either he believes it or not, and if he doesn't believe it, it's either for an audience of one, which is Putin, or just a national audience that doesn't have access to other information, correct?
Well, yeah, I think that's probably the simplest and the most rational answer, that indeed they are working for one particular individual. I had a very long discussion yesterday with some important people, actually, who are also trying to understand what's going on in the inside their heads. And probably the best answer is that they think that after Putin is gone, it doesn't matter, because whoever would appear to be at the helm, the West would need to make a deal with him. And it doesn't matter what he was saying in the past, especially that he was saying it, but like not personally doing some military atrocities or something like this. But for Putin at this moment, all those statements are very comforting. That's what he wants to hear. Very much like Hitler in 1945, who was up to the very last day convincing everybody that anti-Hitler coalition is about to collapse, and yes. Stalin and Churchill and Roosevelt, that they had a lot of disputes, and that the coalition would not survive, etc., etc. So I think that's probably why such statements appearing.
I went back and reviewed some of the interviews you and I have done over the last few months, and I think it was in December that you predicted that Putin would be gone sometime in March or April of 2023. It's the last day or near the last day of March. Do you think he has as little as a month left?
I think that he would be gone exactly after the major offensive by Ukrainian army. Mm-hmm. And we are waiting for this offensive to happen. I think that probably the biggest bottleneck is actually associated with the West. And that's about the supply of the military equipment and shells and all the expendables that are needed, the ammunition that is needed for the military. I think that as soon as that would happen, the Ukrainian army would actually start moving forward. And yeah, that would be the final countdown.
It seems to me in the last few weeks there's been, well, first of all, let me acknowledge that is great news. I hope those with some power and say in the West are listening. So anything you can do to make this happen even faster. You know, Ilya has just really laid the groundwork for why it is so significant immediately, right now, today. It seems to me that even within Russia, I'm reading and seeing about more and more fires, more and more explosions, more and more partisan attacks. Is that my perception that there's increased unrest like that, or is there really an uprise?
No, it is an uprise. There is no explosive growth, but it's a steady progression. You're absolutely right. But again, I would like to stress that my concern is very much associated with the West. If you notice, by the way, and that was for me very worrying sign, is that the court order of military criminal court order, which requested Vladimir Putin and Maria Lvova-Belova, Russian ombudsman on child affairs, that firstly that it was unexpected by the United States, judging by the reaction. That in Washington, D.C., you guys were not ready for this kind of event. And it created a lot of confusion. So they were originally saying that they support, but firstly, they were not ready to give an answer whether they are going to arrest Putin if he would show up on the American soil. But after a while, everybody started to downplay this, and currently they are speaking not even about support of the military of International Criminal Court, but they are saying that it's a new hybrid court needs to be created on the territory of Ukraine, on the Ukrainian soil. And to me, this is an indication that they want to push all the responsibility onto Ukraine, and that they don't want to take any risk that is associated with Vladimir Putin and his prosecution and fighting against him, that everybody wants just Ukrainians to carry on this fight, and that's for me a very unpleasant thing.
Why do you think this approach is being taken?
I think that in the current administration in DC, there is an internal struggle between several group of people. I wouldn't call them like hawks or pigeons, but I would say that there are just people who are extremely cautious and who put higher priority on the future events primarily related to China, and with the people who are concerned about present-day Europe and the security layout in the present-day Europe, and who take this war as the major threat for such security. I think there is an internal competition between those two groups, and I think that the President Biden is a bit balanced between those two, and that's why there is a certain indecisiveness which has been very visible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's going to take some significant event to get those groups aligned in Washington, or is it even possible to get them aligned?
I think they would be aligned inevitably at the very end. I think, first of all, obviously, it very much also depends on the Ukrainian offensive. The longer we wait, the more powerful is the group who just want to settle things down. And the more visible are the military successes of Ukraine, the more powerful is the group who is advocating to help Ukraine and to claim the ultimate victory. But I think that no matter what, unfortunately, I think that United States would again oversleep the regime change in Russia. It would be very much the same, in Ukraine. Everybody remembers when George H.W. Bush in 1991 was making a visit to Kiev, and in Verkhovna Rada in Ukrainian parliament of that time, he made a speech which is known right now as Chicken Kiev speech, because he was chickening out and was saying that guys, stay within Soviet Union, don't challenge Gorbachev, don't do anything in relation to your independence, let's preserve the Soviet Union. And literally 3 months after that, the Soviet Union collapsed.
Yes.
And I think in this particular case, it would be very much the same. The bureaucracy in Washington would wait until the very end, and then things would happen, and then they would be already facing the consequences instead of designing them and steering them in the desirable direction.
So the counteroffensive by Ukraine has implications and consequences much greater than just what happens on the ground. I mean,
I think it's a critical point, and it's a decisive point. It's what many people, actually a lot of military people with military background are saying, that it's a turning point, it's a critical moment, and I think that they're absolutely right. And I think that in Ukraine people do understand. I mean, the Ukrainian leadership, they do understand this indecisiveness on behalf of the West. So they're trying to extract as many resources as possible to push the situation through.
Russia is looking depleted right now, or approaching a state of depletion. Do you think that there might be a surprise up their sleeve, and that they're holding back in any significant way to counter a counteroffensive?
The way you put this question, I don't think that there is anything left in the sleeve. I think that there is a strong deficit of everything, including the deficit of sleeves. Right now, trying to procure some from China,
Yes.
but it's not working well either, as we saw during
Yes.
Mr. Xi Jinping's visit to Moscow. But still, I think that we shouldn't underestimate for Russia just in terms of resources. There is a huge number of people which they can draw from, mobilize more and more cannon meat that they are pushing in the field of battle. Just recently, they started to put into fighting tanks which were produced in 1945, literally.
Right.
T-54s. They were produced from 1945 to 1955, and this kind of strategic reserves that they have. But they're still tanks. Very, very old ones. Not very sophisticated, but nevertheless they are tanks. And to shoot them, it requires quite some effort. So these reserves would definitely make the situation more complicated, but it means just unfortunately more deaths from both sides, but primarily from the side of Russia, and the final outcome would be exactly the same.
I mean, it appears from here that there is a mass of manpower. Well, there's plenty of manpower, but there's very little trained manpower. And so, that has to be a factor too. You can have tanks, but you have to have people who know how to operate them and how to fight successfully once they're taking them forward.
You're absolutely right, and unfortunately, that's exactly what I'm saying, that it's cannon meat. And that's what is happening in Bakhmut. The ratio for casualties is being maintained there more or less the same, 1 to 5.
Yes.
For each Ukrainian soldier, 5 Russian dead soldiers. And Ukraine losing a lot of very capable and great men.
Yes.
But Russia is losing really a lot.
Yes. Yes. I want to ask you about the situation in Belarus as well and what's happening there, because it's related in a variety of ways. Tell us what you see going on there. And I'm actually looking for something on my computer that I want to reference specifically. So forgive me for taking my eyes away while you're speaking. But tell us about what you see going on there and why it's important.
That's, by the way, that's another crazy thing. What we were also discussing here in relation to mental health of Kremlin, in general, of Russia's leadership, is that the Chinese leader was in Moscow.
Yes.
They did agree to nothing but one thing, which was a public statement by 2 leaders that both countries are against spreading around military nuclear weapons, that they want to consolidate all the nukes on their territories, and they want to avoid nuclear escalation at all costs. Literally 3 days later, after Chinese leader left Moscow, Putin makes an announcement that he is going to put tactical nukes on Belarus territory.
Correct.
Which is like 180 degrees opposite from what the guys were discussing in Moscow, and we all know how valuable relationship between Moscow and Beijing are for Putin at the moment, right? So from one side, I think it's a definite indication that they agreed to nothing, and that Putin was very much disappointed by the visit. And it's his personal revenge that he is poking Chinese, demonstrating that we better make some more firm arrangements if you want me to follow our agreements. But at the same time, obviously, it means that the right hand doesn't know what the left wing does.
Well, in this case, it's the right hand and the right hand, because he's the one that was in the meetings, and then he's the one who made the statement. So
yes, and I cannot understand, because it's so rude, and it's so inconsistent.
Yes.
But also, it's there is another illustration of the same thing. Putin was giving a major interview after again Chinese visit. And during the interview, they were discussing the issue of shells, of this depleted uranium shells.
Depleted
and whatever.
uranium.
Yeah, and Putin was saying that, you know what, in our stockpiles we have 100,000s of similar shells, which is true, by the way, because obviously in Russia they also use depleted uranium.
Yes.
But 2 days later, he was visiting some military enterprise, and was saying, we have such a strong deficit of shells for our army that we need to produce more, because it's intolerable how strong is the deficit of shells. Again, it's totally inconsistent statements, which means that they are not paying attention for any coherent public statements that they are making. It means that everything that they are saying has no correlation with reality whatsoever. And I think that the reaction by the United States and the NATO on this statement on Belarus was reflecting the actual situation. People said, okay, we don't see any preparations for the nuclear weapons to be introduced on Belarus soil. They needed to prepare certain storages, the places where to allocate them, and no preparations are going on, which basically means that it was just Putin's statement, which again has no relation to reality.
So in other words, he's so unprepared, he's forced to speak off the cuff.
Yeah, and he is bluffing all the time. He's jumping from one corner to another, and he's trying to scare everybody and project the power that he no longer has.
So I want to spend the rest of our time together today talking about the Congress and getting an update from you to kind of segue into that, because I think this is related. There's a lot going on politically in Belarus in terms of opposition. And it seems like that's getting more and more attention in the West. And as I'm sure you know, and I'm going to mispronounce his name, one politician, Valery Sepkalo, was just, I think, has just been, I'm not sure the proper term, sentenced to 19 years in prison. There's other things like that going on. Let's talk about what's happening with the Congress and how events in a nearby country like Belarus has an impact on what you're doing.
I wouldn't say that the events in Belarus, they affect us a lot, because still Belarus opposition is very much in the same disarray as the Russian opposition, differently, but nevertheless, I think in certain terms, probably it's worse, because from one side they have legitimately elected Tikhanovskaya as the president, which is a great thing to have for them, because they have real political alternative.
Yes.
But at the same time, Tikhanovskaya is not related to the main military arm, of Belarus opposition, which is fighting in Ukraine against Putin's army. And that's why it's one thing which is in theory, and another thing which is in practice, and they are not talking to each other. So this fragmentation does not help. And the aforementioned Valery Tsepkalo represents another branch of Russian opposition. So it's this fragmentation still persists there. From other side, in Russian opposition, we do have the body which is in terms of legitimacy weaker than Tikhanovskaya, because Tikhanovskaya went through election process just recently, and members of Congress of People's Deputies, they were elected more in the past. But at the same time, we combine all pieces together. We combine the armed resistance and we combine the political alternative in one box, so to say. And Mikhail Khodorkovsky, another prominent Russian opposition politician, proposed that by the end of April, different Russian opposition groups should get together in Berlin, in Germany, and discuss the cooperation. And I think that it's a very promising thing. And we are planning to take part in this. And I hope maybe that would mean that the Russian opposition would start to get more united.
Yes. Is there, after his proposing this meeting, have all groups responded positively that they will participate within the Russian opposition?
Well, I know that Garry Kasparov is planning to participate, although there was no public response. We are just publishing our public response on behalf of Congress, actually today or early morning tomorrow, with our set of propositions. And I actually, I would say it says nothing, in terms of the participation. I think that the participation would happen.
Yes.
Just it's very ironic that only us are following certain democratic procedure. That when there is a public address, there is a public discussion, and then there is a public decision with a set position. What we are going to discuss and what we are going to propose, and what is the mandate for our delegates for that meeting. All others, they're just supposed to come, which is very understandable because they represent nobody but themselves. But still, it's good that we will all.
You wouldn't be talking about any one Russian opposition figure in particular there, would you?
Yeah. So but I think that it's still positive.
Okay. All right. Well, it's interesting because the last time we spoke at length about what I called your mystery tweet that referenced Mr. Khodorkovsky, and so it's been 2 weeks. Sounds like a huge step forward for all of you. And I'm assuming that you within your group see this alignment as having a huge upside to it.
Oh, we definitely praise this a lot, and we are very hopeful. I think that it's very important that this unification will start happening. This is what expected from us by the general constituents and by the Western countries as well. Everybody is asking whom to talk with, on what principles, on what grounds. So it would be very useful. What makes me cautious about the success of this initiative is that there is no democratic culture within the Russian opposition. Again, it's very leader-oriented, and there are individuals, who are making decisions. Yes. There are no structures. We have certain institutions.
The Congress being the exception. I mean, as you said, you've taken exactly the opposite approach.
Yeah, the only exception is the Congress. The only exception. Yes, you're right.
Has there been a reaction to this, the call for this meeting from the Kremlin?
No, and I don't think it would actually be any reaction, because they disregard. They say we are not serious, we're clowns, we're nobody, we represent no one. Again, they were paying attention to what Congress was doing in the past in the official media, but we'll see what would be the reaction during the meeting in Berlin. Maybe they would send somebody and make a report.
That they would send someone in a.
Yeah, I mean like state TV or
oh, I see.
Somebody like this. Hmm?
So you don't mean someone to disrupt. You mean media to cover the event.
They very much. It's very much possible that they will send somebody to disrupt.
Mm.
There are plenty of people in Germany who may do such a job, but I hope that the security there would be sufficient.
Got it. So before I let you go, anything else you want to share with us about what's happening with the Congress?
Well, I think we just started preparation for the third Congress, which is about to happen in June. But anyway, our main hopes and inspirations right now is with this unification process, which we will try to support as much as possible.
Because if this is a successful meeting in April, it may change everything that happens at your next meeting of the Congress in June.
Definitely, that's fine.
All right. Ilya, thanks for being here today. It's great to talk with you again, and I look forward to chatting again, I hope, next week.
Thank you very much, and see you soon.